Before we dive into this remarkable story, if you find yourself moved by tales of quiet sacrifice and unexpected strength, please take a moment to share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Sometimes the smallest gesture of connection can change everything, and your subscribe helps us bring more of these stories to light. There are moments in life that cut so deep, so raw, that you carry them with you every single day, like a stone in your shoe that never stops rubbing, never stops reminding you. But there are other moments, rare ones, that carve something else entirely, something that grows so quietly, so secretly, that by the time it blooms, it has already changed everything. This is one of those stories. This is a story about a man who had every reason to walk away, every reason to let bitterness eat him alive, but who chose instead to build something beautiful in the shadows. This is a story about Leo Morrison. And it begins, as all great stories do, with a knock on the door. Before I take you into the depths of this remarkable journey, I want you to do something for me. I want you to think about the last time you felt truly powerless. Think about the last time you watched someone you love being pushed down, being told they weren't enough, being stripped of their dreams, and you could do nothing but stand there and watch. Feel that helplessness for just a moment. Because that is exactly where Leo Morrison found himself on a cold November evening in 2018, when a stranger knocked on his door and handed him a letter that would change everything. Leo Morrison had been an engineer for 42 years. He'd started his career in a small workshop in the basement of his parents' home, tinkering with motors and gears and the kind of mechanical puzzles that fascinated him as a child. He'd been born with a gift, an instinctive understanding of how things worked, how they fit together, how they could be improved. He could look at a machine and see what was wrong with it, could visualize the solution before he'd even picked up a tool. His father had been a mechanic, a man who could fix anything with his hands and his wits. His mother had been a seamstress, a woman who could take a piece of fabric and transform it into something beautiful. Leo had inherited both of their talents. He had his father's mechanical mind and his mother's creative vision. He could build things, yes, but he could also see things that didn't exist yet, could imagine possibilities that others couldn't even conceive. Leo had grown up in a modest neighborhood in suburban Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business and children played in the streets until the street lights came on. He'd been a quiet child, more comfortable with machines than with people, more interested in how things worked than in the social games that other children played. His teachers had noticed his talent early on, had encouraged him to pursue engineering, had told him that he had the kind of mind that could change the world. He'd gone to college on a scholarship, studying mechanical engineering at a state university. He'd worked his way through school, taking odd jobs, repairing cars and appliances and anything else that needed fixing. He'd graduated with honors, had been recruited by a major engineering firm, had spent the first decade of his career working on other people's projects, making other people's dreams a reality. But Leo had dreams of his own. He'd always known that he wanted to build something himself, to create something that would outlast him, to leave a mark on the world that would be uniquely his. He'd spent his evenings and weekends in his basement workshop, tinkering with ideas, sketching plans, building prototypes. He'd filled notebooks with his ideas, hundreds of pages of detailed drawings and calculations and notes. His first invention had been a simple device, a tool that made it easier for people with limited mobility to open jars and bottles. It hadn't been revolutionary, but it had been practical, and it had sold well enough to give Leo the confidence to keep going. He'd used the proceeds from that first invention to fund his next project, and then the next, and then the one after that. Over the years, Leo had developed a reputation as a brilliant but eccentric inventor. He'd created devices for the home, for the workplace, for the medical field. He'd sold some of his inventions, licensed others, and kept a few secret, waiting for the right moment to bring them to the world. But the invention that would change everything, the invention that would ultimately destroy his relationship with his son, was different from anything he'd ever created before. It was a device that could revolutionize energy production, a breakthrough that could make clean energy accessible to everyone. It was the kind of invention that could change the world. Leo's wife, Eleanor, had died in 2013. She'd been his partner, his confidant, the love of his life. They'd been married for 43 years, had weathered every storm together, had built a life that was rich in love and purpose. Her death had left a hole in Leo's heart that nothing could fill. But Leo had kept going. He'd kept working, kept inventing, kept pushing forward. He'd done it for Eleanor, because she'd always believed in him, always encouraged him to pursue his dreams. He'd done it because he didn't know what else to do with himself. David, his son, had grown up in the shadow of his father's success. He'd watched Leo build his inventions, had seen the notebooks filled with ideas, had heard the stories of late nights and early mornings and the struggle to bring ideas to life, but David had never shared his father's passion for invention. He'd been more interested in money and power and the kind of success that could be measured in dollars and cents. After college, David had gone into business, starting his own company, building a reputation as a savvy entrepreneur. He'd been successful, in a conventional way, but Leo had always sensed that David was chasing something that would never quite satisfy him. There was a hunger in his son, a need for more, that seemed to have no end. Leo had tried to mentor his son, to share his passion for invention, to show him that there was more to life than money and status. But David had never been interested. He'd seen his father's work as quaint, old-fashioned, irrelevant. He'd told Leo, more than once, that he was living in the past, that the world had moved on. "What are you doing with all those notebooks?" David would ask, his voice dismissive. "Nobody wants your old inventions, Dad. You need to move with the times." Leo would smile and shake his head. "You never know, son. Sometimes the old ideas are the ones that end up changing everything." David would roll his eyes and change the subject. He didn't understand his father. He never had. In 2016, Leo had a breakthrough. He'd been working on an energy device for years, trying to find a way to generate clean, affordable power using simple, accessible materials. He'd been tinkering with designs, building prototypes, testing and refining and improving. And then, one night, it all came together. The device was elegant in its simplicity. It used a combination of magnetic fields and kinetic energy to generate power, with no moving parts and minimal maintenance. It was safe, efficient, and cheap to produce. It could power a home, a business, a whole community. It could transform the way people lived and worked and moved through the world. Leo had been ecstatic. He'd spent weeks testing the device, refining the design, documenting every detail. He'd filled 3 notebooks with his work, complete with diagrams, calculations, and photographs. He'd built a prototype that worked, that actually worked, that proved his ideas were more than just dreams. He'd called David to share the news. "Son, I've done it. I've created something incredible. Something that's going to change everything." David had come to see the device, had watched his father demonstrate it, had seen the light bulb flicker to life, the fan start to spin, the power meter register a steady flow of electricity. He'd been impressed, Leo could tell. But there was something else in his eyes, something that Leo didn't quite understand. Something that looked like hunger. "That's incredible, Dad," David had said, his voice carefully measured. "Have you thought about how you're going to commercialize it? How you're going to get it to market?" Leo had shrugged. "I haven't really thought about that yet. I'm still perfecting the design. There's a lot of work to do before it's ready." David had nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Why don't you let me handle the business side of things? I've got the contacts, the experience, the know-how. I can help you get this out into the world." Leo had hesitated. He'd always been protective of his inventions, had always kept them close, had always been wary of people who wanted to profit from his work. But David was his son. He could trust his son, couldn't he? The months that followed were a blur of activity. David had taken control of the project, had set up meetings with investors, had filed patents, had formed a company to commercialize the device. Leo had been kept at a distance, told that his role was to continue refining the design, to keep working on the technical side of things. It wasn't until years later that Leo realized what had happened. David had filed for the patent in his own name. He'd taken credit for the invention, had positioned himself as the genius behind the breakthrough. He'd made billions from Leo's work, had become a tech mogul, had been featured on magazine covers and television shows. Leo had confronted his son, had asked him why he'd done it, how he could have betrayed his own father so thoroughly. "Dad, you're old," David had said, his voice cold and dismissive. "No one would believe you anyway. You're just a retired engineer living in poverty. I'm the one who made this happen. I'm the one who brought it to market. I'm the one who deserves the credit." Leo had been devastated. He'd trusted his son, had believed in him, had given him everything. And David had repaid him with betrayal. "I'll fight this," Leo had said, his voice trembling. "I'll take you to court. I'll prove that the invention is mine." David had laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Good luck with that, Dad. You don't have the money for a lawyer. You don't have the resources to fight me. And even if you did, who would believe you? I'm a billionaire. You're nobody." Leo had been forced to sell his house to pay for Eleanor's medical bills. Her cancer had been aggressive, had required expensive treatments that had drained their savings. Leo had been left with nothing but his notebooks and his memories. He'd moved into a small apartment in a rundown part of town, a place that was barely big enough for his workshop. He'd kept working, kept inventing, kept pushing forward. But the betrayal had left him bitter and resentful. He couldn't stop thinking about what David had done, couldn't stop wondering how he could have been so blind. Then, one day, while cleaning out his apartment, Leo found a folder he'd forgotten about. It was filled with documents from the early days of the project, when David had been pretending to help him. Among the papers was a letter that David had signed, a document that acknowledged Leo's role in the invention. Leo remembered the day he'd asked David to sign it. He'd been naive, had thought he was just documenting the history of the project, had thought it was a harmless piece of family history. But David had been arrogant, had thought it didn't matter, had signed it without a second thought. Now, holding the document in his hands, Leo realized that it was the key to everything. It was proof that David knew Leo was the real inventor. It was evidence that could destroy David's claim to the patent. It was a weapon that could bring his son to his knees. Leo had no money for a lawyer. He'd spent everything on Eleanor's medical bills, had given everything to his son. He was living hand to mouth, barely scraping by. But Leo remembered that he knew a young lawyer named Sarah, a woman who had helped him with a legal matter a few years earlier. Sarah had been just starting out then, had taken on his case because she believed in him. Now she was the head of her own firm, a respected attorney with a reputation for taking on difficult cases. Leo called her, told her what had happened, explained the situation. She listened without interrupting, asked a few questions, then said, "I'll take your case, Leo. We'll fight them. We'll fight David, and we'll win." "But I can't afford your fees," Leo said, his voice ashamed. Sarah waved away his objections. "Don't worry about that. When we win, and we will win, the costs will be covered. I believe in your case. And I believe in you." The case was filed in the spring of 2020. Leo was the plaintiff, David was the defendant. The lawsuit alleged patent fraud, breach of trust, and emotional damages. It was a David and Goliath battle, a retired engineer against a billionaire tech mogul. The media had a field day with the story. It was all over the news, the kind of juicy scandal that people love to follow. David's company stock took a hit. His reputation was tarnished. But he fought back, hired a team of expensive lawyers, used every weapon in his arsenal. Leo refused to be intimidated. He'd seen the worst of what life had to offer, had lost his wife, lost his home, lost everything. He'd been broken, but he'd survived. And now he was fighting back. Rebecca was David's wife, and she was miserable. She'd married David for love, had believed in him, had trusted him. But she'd come to realize that he was a cold, calculating man, more interested in his business than in his family. She'd tried to change him, had tried to make him see the error of his ways. But David was stubborn, arrogant, convinced that he was always right. When Rebecca heard about the lawsuit, she contacted Leo. "I know what David did," she said, her voice quiet. "I've known for a long time. And I want to help you." Leo was shocked. "Why would you help me? David is your husband." "He's my husband, but he's not a good man," Rebecca said. "I've tried to make him see what he's become, tried to make him change. But he won't listen. He doesn't care about anyone but himself. So I'm going to help you. I'm going to do the right thing." The trial was a media circus. The courtroom was packed, the cameras were rolling, the world was watching. Leo sat at the table with his lawyer, looking small and frail and out of place. David sat across the courtroom, surrounded by his team of attorneys, looking confident and composed. The evidence was overwhelming. The notebooks were presented, the photographs were shown, the letter was read aloud. David's legal team tried to dismiss it, tried to cast doubt on the authenticity of the documents. But the evidence was too strong, too compelling, too undeniable. The media had a field day with the story, following every twist and turn, reporting every development. People all over the world were following the trial, picking sides, cheering for the underdog. It was the kind of drama that captured the public imagination. The trial reached its climax with Leo's testimony. He took the stand, his voice quiet and measured, and told his story. He talked about his decades of work, the notebooks he'd filled, the inventions he'd created. He talked about the betrayal of his son, the theft of his life's work. He talked about the pain, the loss, the struggle to keep going. Then his lawyer asked the question that would change everything. "Mr. Morrison, can you tell the court about this document?" Sarah asked, holding up the letter that David had signed. Leo nodded. "That's a letter my son signed, acknowledging that I was the inventor. He signed it years ago, before he filed a patent. He thought it was just a harmless piece of family history. But it was proof. Proof that he knew I was the real inventor. The courtroom fell silent. David's face went pale. His attorneys scrambled to object, to deflect, to cast doubt on the document. But it was too late. The damage was done. The jury deliberated for 3 days. Leo spent those days pacing his small apartment, unable to eat, unable to sleep. He thought about Eleanor, about the life they'd shared, about the dreams they'd had. He thought about David, about the boy he'd raised, about the man he'd become. He thought about the future, about what he would do if he won, and what he would do if he lost. Finally, the verdict was read. The jury found in Leo's favor. They ruled that David had committed patent fraud, that he had breached the trust of his father, that he had caused emotional damage. They awarded Leo the patent, and they awarded him $300 million in damages. The courtroom erupted. Leo sat in silence, tears streaming down his face. He'd won. He'd actually won. He'd fought back against the betrayal of his son, and he'd won. David's company's stock plummeted. His board ousted him, his partners abandoned him, his empire crumbled. He was bankrupt, disgraced, alone. The man who had been a billionaire was now a nobody. Leo felt a strange mix of emotions. There was satisfaction, certainly, the satisfaction of having been vindicated, of having been proven right. But there was also sadness, a deep and abiding sadness at the loss of his son. He'd wanted to fight back, but he hadn't wanted to destroy David. "I should have been a better father," Leo said to Sarah, after the trial was over. "I should have seen what he was becoming. I should have stopped him before it went too far." Sarah shook her head. "You couldn't have stopped him, Leo. He made his own choices. You just made sure he faced the consequences." Leo used the money from the settlement to start a foundation for aging inventors. He wanted to help other creative people who had been taken advantage of, other innovators who had been exploited by the system. He wanted to give them the support they needed to fight back. The foundation provided legal assistance, financial support, and mentorship for older inventors. It helped them navigate the patent system, protect their intellectual property, and build sustainable businesses. It became a beacon of hope for people who had been forgotten by the system. "This is my legacy," Leo said, at the foundation's launch. "Not the invention, not the money, but this. Helping other people. Making sure that what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else." David hit rock bottom. He lost everything, his company, his money, his reputation. He became a broken man, wandering through life without purpose or direction. He'd been arrogant, had believed he was invincible, and his fall had been spectacular. One day, David showed up at Leo's apartment. He looked terrible, unshaven, hollow-eyed, broken. "Dad," he said, his voice cracking. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted to tell you the truth." Leo stared at his son. He'd waited so long to hear those words, had dreamed of them, had hoped for them. But now that they'd finally come, he found that he didn't feel the anger he'd expected. He just felt sadness, and something else, something that felt like hope. "Go to the foundation," Leo said. "There's work to be done. Good work. Work that matters. Maybe you can find your way back." David looked at his father, tears streaming down his face. "Why are you helping me? After everything I did?" Leo reached out and touched his son's shoulder. "Because you're still my son. And I still believe that you can be the man I always knew you could be." Leo wrote a memoir about his life. It was called The Notebooks: How a Retired Engineer Fought Back and Won. It told the story of his inventions, of his betrayal, of his fight for justice. The memoir became a bestseller. People all over the world read it, felt inspired by it, shared it with their friends and families. It was optioned by a film studio, and soon it was being made into a movie. At the film's premiere, Leo sat in the front row, surrounded by his supporters. Rebecca was there, holding his hand. Sarah was there, her eyes shining with pride. And David was there, sitting in the back, watching his father receive the recognition he'd always deserved. Leo Morrison died in the summer of 2025, surrounded by the people he loved. He was 91 years old, had lived a long and full life, and had left a legacy that would outlast him. David stood at his father's funeral, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry, Dad," he whispered. "I'm sorry for everything. I should have been a better son. I should have been a better man." He walked away from the grave, carrying with him the lessons his father had taught him. He went back to the foundation, back to the work that Leo had started. He dedicated himself to helping other inventors, to protecting the rights of creative people, to making sure that what had happened to his father never happened to anyone else. The invention that had caused so much pain became a force for good. The royalties from the patent funded the foundation's work, supported thousands of inventors, and built a better world for everyone. And Leo's memoir continued to inspire people, a reminder that justice was possible, that the truth would always come out, that the bonds of family could be repaired even after the deepest betrayal. Leo Morrison had been betrayed by his son, had been stripped of everything he'd built, had been left to die in poverty. But he'd fought back, had won, and had built something beautiful from the ashes of his loss. He'd shown that even in the darkest moments, even in the deepest pain, there was always hope. Always a reason to keep going. Always a reason to believe in the goodness of the world. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Sometimes the smallest act of sharing can open a window for someone who feels trapped. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing to our channel, so you never miss another story that reminds us all of the goodness that exists in this world. Together, we can spread these messages of hope, forgiveness, and the kind of love that changes everything. Before you go, I'd really love to hear from you. What would you do if you found yourself in Leo's situation, discovering that someone you trusted had stolen everything you built? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing so you won't miss the next one.